Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X-Men, Adjectiveless X-Men, or Volume 2, issue number 43, cover dated August 1995. The cover caption, Escape from Avalon. This is part 2 of a 3-part story featuring Magneto, Avalon, and the arrival of Holocaust in the Prime Reality. And the cover is by Andy Kubert, inked by Matthew Ryan, colored by Kevin Summers. And it features very obviously Colossus and Magneto, an unconscious or comatose Magneto escaping, well, from Avalon. And it's quite a dynamic image of Colossus. My complaint regarding, or criticism regarding this particular cover, is the confusion caused by the similar colors of Magneto's costume and parts of Colossus's, his boots and gauntlets there. It just makes it a little bit confusing. You have to look at it twice in order to separate the figures. But I really do like the way that Kubert draws that comatose face on Magneto. I think that looks quite well. And the contrast between his limp body and Colossus's taut and dynamic and moving body. Okay, let's open this one up to the first page here. And it begins on Earth. At the Xavier Institute for Higher Learning, Salem Center, New York. That's an interesting upshot on the front, the facade of the mansion. And then we go inside and we've got Beast and Bishop, and Professor X is using his telepathic powers to try and contact Jean and Scott, who have been teleported aboard Avalon. But Amelia Voigt stayed on Earth and she is recovering at the X-Mansion. It's a pretty good image there by the artist Paul Smith, inked by Matt Ryan of Professor X, concentrating the sweat dripping off his face as he's trying to re-establish his usual psychic rapport with Scott and Jean. And then we turn the page for a double page spread that really picks up from the image at the end, the double page spread at the end of the previous issue, number 42. And we have Scott and Jean, or rather Cyclops and Phoenix, which are their current code names, back to back, holding hands and tackling the masked acolytes who are attacking them. While over here in the background, we've got Holocaust attacking and fighting Exodus. So we get in the narrative captions just to catch up on the events to this point. We have our title here of this particular part of the story. It is a chapter of the story, Falling from Grace. An adventure of Cyclops and Phoenix, brought to you by Fabian Nicieza, writer, Paul Smith, guest penciler, so Paul Smith did the previous chapter, Matt Ryan and Cam Smith, inkers, so that's an indication that maybe there's a little bit of deadline crunch on getting this one to the printers. Richard Starkings and Comic Craft on the digital lettering, and Kevin Summers and Digital Chameleon on the color art. Now, a criticism that I have regarding the art here is I just feel the coloring is a little bit too bright on Paul Smith's art. I feel that Paul Smith's art probably would be better suited to newsprint, not to glossy paper, and to flatter matte colors rather than some of the digital effects here, which just look, in my opinion anyway, a little bit too bright for Paul Smith's art. Let's continue with the story though. This is a very good page. Actually, these two pages together are quite good, but I like the coloring on this page. It works well here. As I said, elsewhere the digital coloring is a little bit overdone, or in the case here of Holocaust, his form is faded out with the digital colors, and I'm not sure whether I like it or not. In any case, back to the story. We have Eunice Shione, if that's how her name is pronounced. I've never heard it pronounced aloud. I'll just give it that kind of slightly Italian pronunciation, where she's blaming Scott and Jean for bringing Holocaust aboard, and she's a bit of a fool for that, because Holocaust was brought aboard Avalon under or at Exodus's command, and Colossus protested against it. So she's really just way off the mark with that accusation there. And Jean says she thinks we're allied with whoever that is Exodus is fighting. And I like Cyclops' response. It's kind of dry, and that's the kind of humor that I expect of Cyclops, that was established most particularly by Chris Claremont. Cyclops says, sure, why not? We get blamed for everything else. I just like that. That's so good. I'm still not exactly sure, he says, how we got here. Well, that was Vought. But it's obvious we're in the thick of it. Colossus was here a second ago. Did you see where he went? So where's Colossus? He's taking care of Magneto. And Jean is worried about Rusty and Skids because, of course, they have an association going all the way back to X Factor. And Cyclops says to her, Jean, keep scanning. I'll buy you some more time. So here is Skids, and she is in the medical center, but it's falling apart, as you can see. And Jean contacts her telepathically, asks her, where are you now? And she says, medical unit, what's left of it? Skids, I can feel your panic. Try and remain calm. We're coming for you. Stay there. I'll track you telepathically. So Skids begins to explain about Rusty, and then Jean enters her mind telepathically in order to know what happened here. And then she gets the backstory going all the way to X-Men Prime, when the chunk of ice that Holocaust was encased in was brought into Avalon, and everything went wrong after that because Holocaust began absorbing the life energies of those around, including Rusty Collins. And then Jean discovers that what sent Holocaust crazy was the information that Magneto was aboard. Holocaust's seething hatred jabs into Jean's mind like a hot knife. So Holocaust really is a malevolent character altogether, and just as quickly subsides. So she explains to Cyclops what's going on, including that he's already killed 2 acolytes, including Rusty Collins, and this sets Cyclops off. And there's a good callback here to X Factor for long-time readers. So we get in the narrative captions the information once they helped a boy learn to cope with his mutant powers, then watch that boy grow into a man. They watched in painful frustration as Rusty was incarcerated, manipulated, and abused by forces beyond their control, and they're sick of it. That's so good from Nicieza. I like that. So Cyclops lashes out with his optic blast, and Jean too cries out, damn you acolytes, Rusty's dead because of your twisted beliefs. I like that. That's cathartic to hear that from these two. So Cyclops grabs Cargill, and again this is a good callback to X Factor continuity, where he accuses her that she couldn't leave him alone. Could you? You've hunted him down ever since you were Frenzy. Again, that goes all the way back to X Factor. You're responsible for screwing up his life then, and you're responsible for killing him now. But Cargill protests. She says he had a home here, a place where he felt he belonged. That's more than the X-Men ever gave him. So we don't get a resolution of that because the acolytes continue attacking Cyclops and Phoenix until what happens next? We have Jean decides to see if she can make telepathic contact with Exodus and get him to stop the fight or get him to calm down because the station Avalon has been destroyed. But there's a little bit of confusion. This is the only point of storytelling confusion in the entire issue from Paul Smith. So this punch to Holocaust's skull makes the reader want to go here for Jean's dialogue, but actually we need to go down here where Scott asks her, are they trying to tear this place apart? And she says, I'm going to establish contact with Exodus, maybe get him to take this fight out of Avalon. Then we get this good shot, this upshot, 3/4 profile on Exodus, and he responds instantly to her telepathically. There are places, Jean Grey, where you're not wanted, and casts her out of his mind. And of course, Jean is an Omega level telepath, so that is saying something about Exodus's power level. And she says to Scott, Scott is mind, incredible. None of us realized how powerful Exodus really is. So that's kind of building his reputation in the Prime reality. We've seen a little bit more about him in Age of Apocalypse. We know his name from there, Paris Bennett. We know a little bit more about his powers and how they were developed by Magneto's training in Age of Apocalypse. But he's a very different character here in the Prime reality. So the fight continues. I like this little scene here, this little sequence of 3 panels where we have got Javits sneaking up behind Holocaust, leaping at him, but Holocaust, without even turning around, grabs him by the throat and completely absorbs his life energy. And he, as I said, like, he's not even distracted, and he's even thinking about the confusion that Cyclops and Jean have regarding him. He's beginning to put it together. Wait, you don't know me. None of you do. This is an intriguing development. But he's caught from behind by Exodus, who's outraged at the death of Javits. All his acolytes are being absorbed by Holocaust. That's a really dynamic panel there, and great body language in the drawings here from Paul Smith. Really well done. And then we get an outside shot of Avalon as beginning to break up, and we've got these superimposed panels. So we've got Rusty here, and she's in big trouble because her section of Avalon is spinning towards the Earth. And in another section, in the central core, we've got Colossus and the comatose Magneto. So Colossus is moving in order to get them out of there and into an escape pod so that he can return to Earth with Magneto. But he's also morally conflicted about abandoning Scott and Jean. So it's like an impossible situation he finds himself in. So here we are in the digital age of coloring. We can have the planet Earth there rendered entirely in digital coloring. That looks effective. That looks good. Let's continue. Now we switch back to Earth just for one page. The rest of the story, or a couple of pages rather, and the rest of the story will take place entirely in Avalon. And this is a page where I would argue that the digital coloring just isn't working well with Paul Smith's art. There's something about it that just isn't. It's like it's overly glossy for his art. It should be flatter. If it were flatter, it would work better, in my view. And in any case, what emerges from this is just a little bit more about Vought. She teleports outside of the room that she's been recovering in, but she's so weak that she collapses. And she explains to Professor X why he's unable to make psychic contact with Scott and Jean. She says, Charles, you'll never be able to communicate with your X-Men. Exodus has severed Avalon from all outside contact, even from telepathic probes. So Professor X, of course, isn't going to give up. And she says, I know, Charles, and I'm truly sorry, but they're as good as dead. And meanwhile, we see all the parts of Avalon dropping towards Earth. And again, we catch up with Skids there, where she is deeply fearful of an icy, empty, lonely death. So she's in peril. Is she going to be saved? She's using her force field to stay alive to that point, but how's she going to survive burning re-entry into Earth's atmosphere? So then we're back aboard Avalon, one other section of it where the fight is continuing, even though it's absolutely demented, between the acolytes and Scott and Jean. And Scott just says, I've had enough of this. Acolytes, stop. We should be working together to get out of here. So Cargill says, why should we trust you? And Unishione, the X-Men are sworn enemies. That's what Magneto taught us. And Cyclops makes a very good argument here. He says, did he really? Or is that simply what people like Fabian Cortez and Exodus told you? How well do any of you really know Magneto? Colossus is getting him to safety right now. Would you rather follow him and learn the truth, or stay here and die as two madmen destroy everything you tried to build? And even though this is a little bit strange, I just want to say that I really like that ear that has been rendered there by Paul Smith. It's such a simple thing, but to get an ear right is a tricky thing to do, and that just looks really well. That's a good panel overall from Paul Smith, and the colouring works well in that. And then the station continues to fall apart. They resolve to work together to get to escape pod on 5 levels down, which can squeeze them all in. So now it's time to get moving. And Jean is still concerned about Skids, of course. She says Skids needs help, and I'm the only one who can survive in space long enough to reach her in time. Scott offers to go together with her, but she says here, I'll take most of my energy just to protect myself out there, Scott, and the acolytes need you more. I'll be fine. So they separate, and just at the point that Jean is leaving, Professor X finally makes telepathic contact. So obviously he's either used all of his strength to break through Exodus's barrier, or Exodus's concentration on the fight with Holocaust has divided his attention, and the psychic barrier is down, so the professor is able to make contact. So he gets the status from Jean, and then he makes contact with Colossus here and tells him, you must get off the asteroid. Save Magnus, save yourself. And when Colossus, because he's worried about Scott and Jean, the professor is able to tell him they're abandoning the station, as must you. God be with you, he says to Colossus. And I like this bit from Nicieza and Colossus's thoughts. He says, I sincerely hope someone is, because this mechanical monstrosity obviously is not. So there's a problem with the getting out into the escape pod, but he manages to do it. Straps Magneto in. That's a very good panel there of him strapping Magneto in. That's difficult to do, but he does it well, Paul Smith. And then they're away. And Jean realizes, it's not Scott, it's Cyclops and Magneto. And she thinks to herself, got to stop worrying, Red. Scott will be fine. It just feels so empty when the psionic rapport we share is disrupted like this. Can't think about that now, because right now he's got his job to do. So they're well used to working as a team, and they are separated now, but Jean is concentrating on rescuing Rusty. And so out she goes into space, and she says a telekinetic shove takes care of the bulkhead, and a telekinetic atmospheric sheath takes care of me. Now that's interesting. So obviously she's using her telekinetic power to keep a bubble of air around her from Avalon as she goes out into space. But what I'm wondering is, how does telekinesis work in the vacuum of space, where there's nothing to rub up against, so to speak? How is she maneuvering in the vacuum of space? Or have they hit the outer reaches of the Earth's atmosphere? Is there some air molecules up there, or gaseous molecules that are supportive, or that her telekinetic power can operate with in order to move her around in this fashion? That's what I'm curious about. Anybody have any ideas on that? How would telekinesis work in the vacuum of space? In any case, she makes her way into Skids' chunk of Avalon that is falling towards the Earth. And she thinks to herself, Skids' thoughts are so weak, I can barely feel her. And then we check back with Scott and the acolytes. They have a problem. There's no escape pod outside their chunk of Avalon. It's disappeared. They're all gone. They're gone. All of the escape pods are missing. So that's a big problem. Then we check back with Exodus and Holocaust. They just continue their insane combat. The section of Avalon that they're fighting in is just exploding around them. Scott says to Unicione, quickly extend your psionic exoskeleton, we're going down. And so this is it. We're coming to the climax of this particular chapter of the story. The fight just continues there between Exodus and Holocaust. And Professor X here is exerting all of his mental powers in order to maintain contact with his students. But as Exodus and Holocaust topple headlong through Earth's stratosphere, their presence is felt like a stab in the very heart and soul of one man. So that seems like it takes Professor X out of things. This is a great page here. I like the astral, the way that Paul Smith has rendered Jean's face in her astral form. That looks really good. That kind of device goes all the way back to Neil Adams. So she's lost contact with Charles, and I wonder, is this a little connection also with Onslaught as well, where Jean says, I thought I felt, never mind. So I wonder what's going on there, what's being hinted at. In any case, she instructs Skids to maintain her force field around them to protect them from re-entry burn, while Jean telekinetically keeps this hunk of wreckage in one piece. So Skids asks about Scott, And Jean says, my rapport with him is back. I can feel them. They're still alive, but they're in worse shape than we are. So they're in this hunk of Avalon that is falling headlong and burning up on re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. So Unitione is trying to keep her exoskeleton extended around the group within the section of Avalon, and it's straining her greatly, of course. And then Exodus and Holocaust are falling into the Pacific. One Piece, held together by the sheer force of hatred between two men who would be gods, is lost to an ocean as deep as their own delusions. That's pretty good. While above, final 3-panel sequence, 20 minutes to go, but the strain, they can't take much more. Jean thinks to herself, oh no, their screen's starting to give way. The heat is starting to get through. Scott, she calls out. So that's a hell of a cliffhanger to end this particular chapter on. Over here, next issue, the acolytes have fallen, Avalon is no more. But what about Cyclops, Phoenix, Colossus and Magneto? Find out next month when Andy Kubert resumes his penciling duties for The Lost and Found. So that's the third and final part of this trilogy. Well, I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on X-Men 43. And let me know your thoughts about the issue itself in the comment section to the video. If you enjoyed my review and commentary, please like the video on YouTube. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more content like this.